Thank you, Ashok, and I sort of think we're quite privileged to have the current president of IUCN introducing it, and also part of the future president of IUCN, but hopefully debating forests and poverty beforehand, and thank you for those who are staying on. Just one thing before I start my presentation. When we started up with an IUCN Livelihood Landscape Strategy slide, this session isn't an IUCN session, it's a multi-partner session that's been presented from lots of perspectives of a lot of interesting organisations who are involved in poverty and conservation. So I'm just going to give 10 minutes and really touch on some of the things that we've been working on over the last 5 years. The Livelihood Landscape Strategy, as you can see here, is a very large initiative that we've had at IUCN have been supporting, funded by DGIS of the Netherlands, and it's been going for 5 years. And out of that we've had a lot of outcomes from the 5 years. Working with numerous partners and in 27 landscapes across 23 countries. So it's a vast pool of knowledge that we've been able to acquire over the last 5 years. And its aim at the bottom there really to deliver environmentally friendly, financial, sustainable and sociable equitable outcomes that promote productive landscapes. And that's been one of the critical things that's been at the heart of what we've been looking at and working on. And I hope this presentation over the next 7 or 8 minutes just highlights some of those things. And I think one of the things just to clarify of what the strategy and the initiative was doing was testing theories, looking at actions and learning on the ground and from our activities that we were doing. And it wasn't a new project or program, it was very much integrated into IUCN's work that we were already existing on, and also, like, for example, the 60 partners. So it wasn't starting from anew, it was building on existing work. The 4 themes that we worked on were based on the theory of looking at productive landscapes and looking at the livelihood dependency and the livelihood reliance of forest landscapes that the local people had. And it was this theory behind those things that we really looked at to look at forest governance, markets and incentives, poverty reduction and landscape transformation through activity negotiation and policy influence. Obviously with this session I'm going to focus on more of the poverty aspects and just give you some very, very brief examples of some of the findings that were coming out and some of the examples of where we had impact. One of the key things that we were working on was using tools and looking at the rights, locally controlled forest restoration and income generating activities. And one of the key tools behind that we used was the Forestry Poverty Toolkit, which was supported mainly with the support of Profor. And this was a tool to look at interventions, but it was also a tool to give us analysis that we could draw out and look at some of the key fundamental issues that were developing throughout our landscapes. And one of the key things that we found was the forest reliance. The landscapes that we worked on, and this will be reinforced through other of the presentations, is about 25 to 30% of annual income of rural populations. And it's changing the thinking of how people are approaching and governments are approaching forests. And its cash income is quite minor compared to the direct consumption, non-cash income that it provides. And that's really a key fundamental issue that we have to deal with when developing national policies and how governments are actually driving forward the forestry agenda in their countries. And just to give you an example of some of the work that we did using the Forestry Poverty Toolkit in Uganda, going through the 2 or 3 villages that we worked in and equating that up to a value of a forest to rural people, it comes to over $4 billion a year. And if you take that to an international level and looking at the 1.5 billion people who rely on 25 to 30% of the world forest, this gives you a global estimation of 130 billion a year. And that's with just cash and non-cash income. And if you take in other services, that can go up to 720 billion a year. And then those figures at the bottom just give you some idea of how much that is worth for every household and how much is used domestically. And whilst those figures may not look substantial to us, to rural income, that's a substantial amount additionality to people's income. And then also through the Forest Poverty Toolkit, and there's multiple examples of this graph that I could use, but I just want to show you this one from Burkina Faso, where a lot of the income comes from agriculture, and through the wealth categorization of the local communities, you can see that from 12 o'clock probably around to 5 o'clock is the forest income, whether it be cash or non-cash, and that with wealthy people is less than if you look at the poor people and very poor men and women in the village. Their reliance on forest resources comes from, you can probably see, goes round from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. So as the further down from the categorization of wealth, people rely much more on their forest resource. And this was done by wealth categories, but we also did it from a spatial analysis and distance from the markets, and also by gender as well. And each three of those are different categories that people who are involved in could probably spend half an hour discussing. But in with the 10 minutes is just to try and give you an example of where the variations in reliance on forest resources come from. And also, I think I just slip in this photo because it's sort of one of my favourite stories. Having lived in Malawi for 4 years, I noticed that on the BBC News every 2 years they stick out a story and say the poor Malawians are starving because they're selling mice by the side of the road. Well, actually, it's a snack and a delicacy that people driving along the road, will stop and eat. So the assumption is that it's being used as a safety net. But actually that last photo is that it's not, it's part of people's income and a source of people's income, and it's a regular part. But actually it gets a misconception that when they're using forest resources, it actually is part of a safety mechanism and reaction to drought. And then also there's a breakdown of a lot of key things that came out from our landscapes and using the toolkit. The categories for both cash and non-cash they're used throughout the year. It's a consistent source. I think the supply and the demonstration of that last slide of the mice show that it is a constant supply and use. And also the different usage between men and women is critical. That women tend to use low forest products and men specific high value products. And then just a couple of examples of some interventions that we had. And one of the key things that came out, and one of the learnings that came out, is through very small interventions you can have substantial impact. In Brazil, investment into community organisation, access to process and marketing increased around forest products twofold, fourfold, or just a specific figure of $5,000 spread across 2,400 households. Doesn't mean that was just going across one household. There was different variations of increase depending on their work with those products. And then in Laos, just by setting in more specific community management techniques and practices, there was a decrease in felling of the malva tree and a substantial level of income. In actual fact, you'll be able to have a more specific discussion. I'm already putting in the 1 minute plug for the dating after this. And then just some of the key conclusions that are coming out from the livelihood and landscape strategy is the value of forests, and it's consistently underrated and really needs to be integrated into national level accounts and statistics, to include forest valuation from a poverty perspective. And what is that valuation? Forest, I've been to recent international meetings where we've been designing international resource assessments, and forests are still measured in the amount of timber that they provide and the income from the timber, and there's not a consideration of the poverty and how that can interlink. And then just to move on to just a couple of final slides, and I think I just want to stay this one as we are at the IUCN World Conservation Congress, of some of the impacts, and perhaps we should have put this one up right at the beginning when everyone was leaving the presidential debate, because the lessons from the livelihood and landscape strategy have really influenced the 2013-2016 IUCN programme, particularly the human dependency on nature and natural resource governance framework, which are key fundamental work that the livelihood and landscape work has been doing around its looking at the links between conservation and poverty, and it's really now integrated into IUCN's programme. So I've had the sign to finish. It's 10 minutes is a very, very short time to even give you a taster of livelihood and landscapes. But there is there's 3 or 4 sessions in this room, and I can see even more people who have been involved in livelihood and landscapes over the last 5 years who will be here to also discuss afterwards. And this last final slide is actually we've finally finished some of the publications, and Daniel will be bringing them down at the front and also be launched. But I think a lot of this that I've just presented is integral behind it. So Ashok, I shall finish.
Thank you.
And hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay.